It's always the places you think are safest that reveal the cracks in your armor. On a muggy Saturday afternoon, the parking lot of a Kroger in Franklin, Tennessee, buzzes with the usual chaos. Shopping carts rattling, rain clouds gathering, car alarms chirping, kids whining for snacks. 6-year-old Emma Parker sits in the back seat of her stepmother's old Honda, hugging a battered gray rabbit with one torn ear so tight it's almost suffocating. Her knees are pulled up to her chest, face pressed against the foggy window, breath making ghostly shapes in the glass. Outside, rain taps a nervous beat, mixing with the distant rumble of thunder and the metallic click of someone locking their car doors. It should feel ordinary, but nothing is ordinary for Emma these days. Not since her mom died. Not since silence became her shield. Across the lot, Catherine, Emma's stepmother, 34, small and sharp-eyed, hair tied back in a desperate ponytail, wrestles 2 overflowing bags of groceries and battles a wave of nausea. Her mind's not on the price of milk or whether she remembered the cereal Emma actually likes. She's stuck replaying a memory she wishes she could burn from her brain. A dog's jaws, the hot rush of pain, the taste of metal as a child. It's why her left hand trembles as she loads the bags into the trunk. Why she glances over her shoulder every few seconds. Why she's never left Emma alone in the car for more than a few minutes. Until today, when the rain came on so sudden, she thought it safer to dash in and out. She tells herself she'll be back in under 5 minutes. The world, it seems, has other plans. Suddenly, Emma straightens. The rhythmic patter on the window is broken by something heavier, closer. 3 German shepherds emerge from behind a muddy pickup, moving together with eerie purpose. Shadow, the biggest, his black coat streaked with scars and eyes cold as riverstone, leads. Gunnar lumbers behind, older, graying at the muzzle, walking with a limp that speaks of old battles and older pain. Nova, the youngest, moves with cautious curiosity, her golden eyes soft, tail flicking as if to test the mood. The 3 form a triangle around the Honda, silent except for their labored breathing and the splash of their paws in the puddles. Emma freezes, clutching her rabbit so hard her knuckles turn white. The shepherds circle the car once, twice, Shadow's nose brushing against the door handle, Gunnar's gaze locking on Emma through the glass. Are they waiting? Hunting? Emma's heart beats so loud she's sure the dogs can hear it. She thinks of her mother, of the dark nights filled with nightmares, of the words she never says aloud. Inside the Kroger, Catherine is at the register when she glimpses the dogs through the plate glass window. For a moment she can't breathe. Her chest tightens. The memory of teeth on flesh roars back. Then she sees Emma's pale face in the car, and everything else falls away. Groceries spill across the wet pavement as she sprints outside, shoes slipping, hair wild, fighting the terror rising inside. Every step brings her closer to Emma, but also to the snarling jaws of her childhood. The parking lot seems to stretch forever. People stop and stare. Some film on their phones, others whisper. Nobody moves to help. Catherine yells Emma's name, voice cracking, but Emma is silent, eyes wide and unblinking, hand pressed against the glass as Nova, gentle, trembling, lifts her paw and sets it on the window beside Emma's. The moment holds, a child, a dog, a world of pain on either side of the glass. Shadow growls, low and guttural, as Catherine approaches, but Nova turns and noses at his side as if to say, wait. Gunnar sits heavily by the bumper, watching, weary but unthreatening. Catherine's every instinct screams to turn back, to run, but she forces herself closer, hands shaking so badly she fumbles with her keys. As she fumbles, she notices a glint on Shadow's collar, a battered metal capsule. Hesitating, Catherine edges closer, and, after a tense moment, Shadow sits, fixing her with a gaze that is almost pleading. With trembling fingers, she twists the capsule open. Inside, a note scrawled in shaky handwriting and a worn photo of a grinning man in army fatigues with the 3 dogs. The note reads, "Help me. My dogs are all I have left. Robert Wells. If you find them, trust them. They will protect you. Beware my neighbor, Thomas Crawford." In that instant, the mystery deepens. Are these dogs truly a threat? Or are they here for something more, drawn to Emma's silent pain like a magnet? Catherine's mind spins. Her childhood terror wars with the raw urgency of the moment. She looks at Emma, at the pleading eyes of Nova, at the photo in her shaking hands. A shout from across the lot. James Parker, Emma's father, running toward them, worry etched deep into his face, rain plastering his shirt to his back. Catherine's heart slams in her chest. The world seems to narrow to this single, breathless point. 3 dogs, 1 child, a storm, a decision that cannot be undone. For a second, no one moves. Then, against all odds, Emma slowly, carefully presses her palm to the glass where Nova's paw rests. For the first time in months, her eyes soften. Catherine sees it, the tiniest glimmer of hope breaking through the storm. But above them, thunder growls. The future is uncertain. And as Shadow's dark eyes meet Catherine's, the question hangs heavy in the air. Should she risk bringing these haunted dogs, and the ghosts they carry, home? The rain intensifies, hiding Catherine's tears. The world is watching. The choice is hers. And somewhere inside, both she and Emma sense it. The danger is real, but maybe, just maybe, the only way out is through. The decision didn't feel like a choice at all, more like tumbling headfirst down a path set in motion long before the Parkers ever stepped into that parking lot. As the rain eased to a cold drizzle, James Parker reached his family, breathless, scanning Emma for injuries, and glaring at the German shepherds, as if his stare alone could scare them off. But the dogs didn't flinch. Shadow kept his battered head high. Gunner slumped at Nova's side, and Nova's gaze never left Emma's face, as if she was memorizing it. James stood between Catherine and the car, his big frame tense. "Catherine, back away. Those dogs aren't safe." His voice was rough, protective, but Catherine barely heard him over the pounding of her heart and the storm of memories inside her. She held up the photo and note. "They're not strays. Look, someone needs help. Robert Wells. This is his handwriting. These dogs belong to someone who's desperate." Emma pressed her palm harder against the window, eyes pleading. For the first time since her mother died, her voice broke through the silence, small but certain. "We can't leave them here. They're scared, like me." The words seemed to shock everyone. James froze, Catherine's hand trembled, and even the onlookers nearby fell silent. A car door slammed in the distance. An elderly man in a red ball cap watched from 2 spots over, muttering under his breath about dangerous breeds, while a mother hurried her child past the scene, glaring at Catherine as if she'd just put Emma in harm's way. The Parkers were already on the edge of the community's goodwill. Catherine was still the new wife, James, that army kid with baggage, and Emma was the girl who never smiled. James knelt, eyes level with Emma through the glass. "Honey, listen. We have to let animal control handle this. These dogs could be dangerous." Emma shook her head so hard her curls bounced. "No, they need us." Nova, sensing the child's rising distress, gave a soft, almost whimpering sound, her paw still pressed against the window. Catherine felt a flash of anger at the world, at fate, at the judgmental eyes of strangers, at her own childhood fear that threatened to ruin everything. But when she looked at Emma, she saw something she hadn't seen in months. Courage. The little girl's face was pale, but her jaw was set. Catherine's own hands were shaking, sweat slicking her palms, but she found herself unlocking the door. The German shepherds didn't charge, they waited, as if giving permission. Catherine moved slowly, voice steady but quiet. "James, get Emma. I'll watch the dogs." Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to focus on Emma, not on the dog's teeth or the rain-damp fur. James lifted Emma from the back seat, wrapping her in his arms. As he did, Nova stepped back, making space, while Gunnar sat heavily by the bumper, and Shadow stood as still as a statue, never breaking eye contact with James. There was a tense pause. Then, without warning, Shadow limped over to Catherine and pressed his head gently against her knee. Catherine flinched but didn't move away. The scars on his muzzle looked old, the eyes behind them ancient and sad. "What do we do?" James asked, voice hollow. Catherine swallowed hard, tucking the note and photo into her jacket. "Robert Wells, he's an Army vet. The note says he doesn't trust his neighbor, Thomas Crawford. These dogs might be in real danger if we leave them." She hesitated, her phobia making her breath hitch. "We take them home, just for the night. We'll call the number on the photo. Find Robert. Figure this out tomorrow." James's face was stormy with worry. "We can barely afford groceries, Kath. Vet bills, more mouths to feed." But Emma turned, tears on her cheeks, and whispered, "Please." That one word, small, determined, full of hope, was enough. They loaded the groceries, Emma in the back with her stuffed rabbit, and Catherine guiding the shepherds into the back of James's pickup. Nova jumped in first, nuzzling Emma through the glass, Gunnar following slowly with Emma urging him on, and finally Shadow, always last, always watchful. The dogs huddled together, wet and shivering but quiet, as if they knew not to press their luck. As they pulled away from the lot, Catherine saw neighbors watching from their porches, curtains twitching, whispers spread. "Military dogs? Why are those people taking them in?" Even before the Parkers turned onto their street, rumors began to grow. Some folks saying it was a kindness, others muttering about lawsuits, danger, and people like them. Back at the small house on Willow Lane, James unlocked the door while Catherine, her hands shaking, tried to keep the dogs from bolting inside all at once. She wiped her feet 3 times before entering, a ritual she couldn't explain, but which made her feel safer, cleaner. The house felt smaller with the dogs in it, every shadow lengthened by the uncertainty swirling around them. Emma, still clutching her rabbit, sat on the faded living room carpet. Nova immediately lay down beside her, resting her chin on Emma's knee. Shadow patrolled the perimeter, checking every window, while Gunnar lay by the door, panting heavily. Catherine watched them, her mind spinning with questions. Could they afford this? Was she putting Emma at risk? Was she risking her own heart, opening herself to animals that triggered every ancient fear? James poured coffee he didn't really want, staring out the kitchen window. "We'll call animal control first thing," he said quietly. But his eyes kept flicking back to Emma, who for the first time since her mother's death, seemed almost peaceful. Later that night, as the rain picked up again, Catherine caught Emma gently stroking Nova's ears, whispering secrets. Catherine stood in the doorway, the dogs sprawled around her feet, the uncertainty pressing in on all sides. Could these wounded souls, human and animal, actually help each other heal? Or were they just stacking more heartache on top of old scars? Catherine didn't have the answer yet, but for the first time she was willing to find out. The rain faded into a dull, constant whisper on the roof, as if the storm itself was reluctant to let go of the day's chaos. In the days that followed the unexpected arrival of the 3 German shepherds, the Parker household shifted on its axis. Every routine was upended, every comfort and fear exposed under the scrutiny of these new, silent witnesses. Catherine found herself moving through her home with a strange new alertness. Each morning she'd pause in the doorway, scanning the living room where the dogs slept on old towels she'd laid out, careful to avoid waking them too soon. She wasn't sure which unnerved her more, the dogs themselves, or how quickly her heart leaped at every soft sound. Yet even as her phobia clawed at her, she couldn't deny the sense of duty that came from reading and rereading Robert Wells's desperate note. Gunnar, the oldest, had developed a persistent, rattling cough. It worried Catherine more than she cared to admit. Despite every warning bell in her mind, she approached him gently, setting out bowls of water and rice, watching his labored breaths and the dull glaze in his eyes. She realized one evening, as she sat cross-legged a safe distance away, that her fear had become tangled with something else, pity maybe, or responsibility. When Gunnar winced as he tried to stand, Catherine gritted her teeth and crawled closer, hands trembling as she checked his leg for swelling. The scar on her own ankle throbbed with phantom pain, but she pressed on, murmuring soft encouragements she didn't know she remembered. Emma, meanwhile, was changing before everyone's eyes. The child who once shrank from any touch or loud sound now seemed magnetically drawn to Nova. Each night, as Catherine tucked Emma into bed, she found Nova curled at Emma's side, the girl's fingers buried in the shepherd's thick fur. Sometimes Catherine would hear Emma's voice, soft and secretive, telling Nova stories she'd never shared with anyone else. "I miss Mom, but you make me feel safe," Emma would whisper, her words muffled but unmistakable. Catherine would stand in the hallway, breath caught in her chest, afraid to move and shatter the fragile magic. Small gestures began to bridge the gulf between fear and trust. One morning, Catherine's hand shook so badly she almost dropped the dog food, but Nova waited patiently, tail wagging in encouragement, while Shadow sat close, never breaking eye contact. Gunnar, grateful for attention, let out a soft sigh and rested his head on Catherine's knee. The weight of it was grounding, real, physical, undeniable. James, for his part, remained unsettled. He kept a wary eye on the bank account, scribbling figures in a battered notebook, bills piling up on the kitchen counter. But even he couldn't ignore the way Nova seemed to read the room, resting her head on his knee when he grew tense, nosing at his hand until he managed a tired smile. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Nova trotted over and dropped Emma's ragged stuffed rabbit into James's lap, as if offering a peace treaty. He laughed, the sound rusty and uncertain, but it was laughter nonetheless. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Catherine made a discovery that shook her. She'd been brushing Gunnar, murmuring to herself, when she noticed the way the dogs responded to certain words and gestures. When she said heel, all 3 shepherds lined up at her side, eyes alert. A sharp down sent them dropping to their bellies, perfectly in sync. Catherine, curiosity piqued, tested a few more commands, military phrases she'd overheard James mention. The response was immediate, almost eerie. The next day, Catherine called the local vet for advice. Dr. Patel, a gentle, silver-haired woman with a deep love for animals and a soft spot for military families, agreed to squeeze them in. Catherine bundled the dogs into the pickup, Emma riding beside Nova, silent but brave. At the clinic, Dr. Patel scanned the dogs' microchips, frowning at the results. "They're registered as service animals," she explained, handing over the paperwork. "And there's a note here. These dogs are specially trained for PTSD support. That's rare, Catherine. Whoever owned them went through a lot to keep them together. The revelation landed like a thunderclap. These weren't just strays. They were survivors, bonded by something deeper than routine. Catherine felt the world tilt. Memories of her own childhood trauma colliding with the knowledge that these dogs had likely seen darkness and carried invisible wounds, just like her and Emma. Later that night, Catherine sat on the edge of Emma's bed, exhaustion pulling at her bones. For the first time, she admitted the truth. "Emma, I'm scared of dogs," she whispered, voice barely above a breath. Emma rolled over, sleepy but attentive. "It's okay, Cat," she said, using the nickname she'd given Catherine months ago. "You can be scared, but we can help them, like they help us." With solemn ceremony, Emma handed over her stuffed rabbit. "For courage," she insisted. Catherine took it, her fingers brushing the worn fabric, and something inside her loosened. In the living room, the shepherds waited, patient as ever. Over the next few days, the house slowly found a new rhythm. Shadow kept watch. Ever the sentinel, Gunnar slept by the door, and Nova became Emma's constant companion. The pain and fear didn't vanish, but in their place grew something different: the possibility of healing. For the first time since tragedy struck, hope flickered in the darkness, and all the while the feeling lingered. These dogs had chosen them for a reason. Their loyalty went beyond survival. Somehow in this messy, patched-together family, everyone was learning to trust again, even if they didn't yet know what the next test would be. The rain's constant drumming softened as days passed, but inside the Parkers' house, a different kind of storm lingered. At night, the world shrank to the hush of distant thunder and the rise and fall of 3 dogs breathing. Catherine often found herself alone in the living room, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, the note from Robert Wells clutched between her fingers. She would read and reread those desperate words, her mind replaying memories she'd spent years trying to forget. A dog's sudden lunge, the cold shock of fear, her mother's panicked screams. No matter how many years had gone by, the ghost of that childhood attack had never really faded. Yet now, surrounded by Shadow, Gunnar, and Nova, Catherine was forced to confront those shadows every hour. Sometimes in the stillness of evening, she watched Shadow doze by the back door, his nose twitching as if in pursuit of dreams she'd never know. She wondered if he too was haunted by old wounds. More and more she found herself drawn to the big shepherd, trying to read meaning in the way he watched over Emma and Gunnar, always alert, always present but never pushy. Emma, meanwhile, bloomed like a wildflower after rain. The little girl, who once retreated from every voice, every question, began to open up in ways Catherine had never dared hope for. Emma's world was small but sacred. Her bedroom, now filled with the warmth of Nova's sleeping body. The living room, where she whispered secrets into soft fur. The kitchen, where she'd set out a bowl of water with the kind of care only a child can give. At night, Nova lay beside Emma's bed, perfectly still except for the occasional nuzzle during one of Emma's nightmares. On those nights, Emma would wake, sweaty and shaking, to find Nova's dark eyes waiting, and somehow the world seemed less scary. Tharinen noticed the change, but the shift in her own heart was slower. Every time she reached to pet one of the dogs, she braced for that familiar surge of anxiety. Yet it didn't always come. Sometimes she found herself absently scratching Shadow behind the ears as she read Robert's note once more, her heart racing, but her hand steady. One evening, as she sat cross-legged on the floor, Shadow eased his heavy head into her lap, his breath warm against her skin. Catherine's first instinct was to flinch, to pull away. but she forced herself to stay still, willing her body to trust what her mind could not. They sat together in silence for a long time, and for the first time since childhood, Catherine felt the grip of old fear loosen, just a little. It was during these quiet nights that secrets began to surface. Emma, curled up with Nova, confided things she'd never told anyone, not even her father. "I miss Mom," she whispered one night, her voice muffled by Nova's fur. "Sometimes I think I'll forget her face." Nova listened in perfect stillness, only moving to rest her paw on Emma's hand, as if to anchor her in the present. Catherine, overhearing from the doorway, felt a lump rise in her throat. She knew what it was to be held hostage by memories. Knew, too, the way loss could steal your voice. James found himself caught between these two worlds, the old wounds he'd never fully healed, and the fragile hope now flickering in his daughter and wife. One afternoon, as he sifted through a box of family photos, he stumbled upon a faded letter addressed to his late father, a decorated Army captain. The handwriting was unmistakable, Robert Wells's. The letter spoke of gratitude and brotherhood, of a bond forged in war and sealed by acts of bravery. It dawned on James, slowly and painfully, that the dogs now sleeping on his living room rug had once served with his father. They had been trained not just to obey, but to heal, to find the wounded, to comfort the broken. For James, the realization was a gut punch and a gift. The legacy he'd inherited was heavier than he'd ever imagined, but suddenly, it didn't feel so lonely. In the days that followed, Emma took on small tasks with a sense of purpose Catherine had never seen before. She helped Gunnar take his medicine, her hands gentle and sure, murmuring encouragement with the patience of someone twice her age. Gunnar, who had once shied from every touch, now looked for Emma when he was hurting, trusting her completely. The sight of the two of them together, an anxious child and a battered dog, brought tears to Catherine's eyes more than once. But beneath this growing sense of belonging, a tension remained. Catherine lay awake some nights, haunted by the fear that the dog's true owner, or someone even less trustworthy, would come knocking. The note from Robert Wells was explicit. "Beware my neighbor, Thomas Crawford." Catherine wondered who he was, and what darkness might follow if he showed up at their door. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on her, even as hope began to grow. Still, in the soft hush of the house at midnight, with Shadow's head in her lap and Emma's laughter drifting from the next room, Catherine dared to believe that healing, true healing, might be possible for all of them. The question wasn't whether they deserved happiness. It was whether they were brave enough to reach for it, despite everything the past had taught them. The dogs seemed to sense the shifting ground beneath the Parkers' feet. Their presence was grounding, their loyalty unwavering. In the stillness, Catherine realized the bond they were building went both ways. The family needed the dogs, but the dogs, too, seemed to need them. And as she closed her eyes just for a moment, the old wounds felt less sharp. The ghosts of the past faded into the background, replaced by something fragile and new. Hope, trembling but alive, waiting to see what tomorrow would bring. Trouble arrived not with a bang, but with the shrill bark of a squad car's horn outside the Parker house on a rain-slicked Thursday morning. Catherine was kneeling beside Gunnar in the kitchen, coaxing the old dog to eat, when the blue lights flickered through the front window. The dogs tensed in unison. Shadow sprang up from his post, ears sharp. Nova leapt to Emma's side in the living room. Even Gunnar, weary and stiff, let out a warning rumble deep in his chest. The whole house seemed to freeze. James opened the door to find Officer Reynolds, a familiar face, broad-shouldered and serious, standing on the porch beside a stranger in a wrinkled windbreaker. The man's jaw was clenched, lips pressed tight in a look Catherine instantly distrusted. "James Parker?" the officer called, nodding a greeting. "Sorry to bother you, but this is Thomas Crawford. He's claiming the dogs you found last week belong to him." At that moment, Catherine's heart thudded painfully. Shadow's warning growl rose in his throat, but she gently held his collar, whispering a plea for calm. James stepped outside, shutting the door behind him, but not before Emma darted to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass, Nova's head resting protectively on her knee. Crawford wasted no time. "They're my dogs, Robert Wells. He was my neighbor, but he's not in any condition to care for them now. He asked me to look after them, and then they vanished. You can check the paperwork." He thrust a manila envelope at Officer Reynolds, who took it with a practiced sigh. Inside, Catherine clutched the battered note from Robert, anger and dread swirling in her chest. She wanted to trust the system, but nothing about Crawford's manner felt right. The dogs seemed to agree. Shadow never took his eyes off Crawford, his body taut and ready. Gunner whined, shifting restlessly. Nova, usually calm, paced between Emma and the door, uneasy. Officer Reynolds glanced between James and Crawford, weighing his words. "The paperwork looks legitimate," he said. "But just to be sure, we'll need to check their microchips at the vet. Until then, the dogs should stay here." Crawford bristled but nodded, his gaze lingering on the house longer than necessary. "I'll be back," he said, voice oily and cold. Word spread quickly through Willow Lane. Some neighbors peered from behind curtains, whispering about lawsuits, military dogs, and the Parkers' bad luck. Others stopped James in the driveway with awkward encouragement or thinly veiled warnings. At the grocery store, Catherine overheard a woman mutter, "Those people always bring trouble," as she passed by. Emma, sensitive to every sideways glance, clung to Nova at the dog park, refusing to let go even when other kids invited her to play. The pressure built inside the house. Catherine's old fears began to resurface, fueled by the anxiety of losing the dogs and the sense of security they'd brought. She lay awake at night, replaying every moment, trying to convince herself they'd done the right thing. But doubt gnawed at her, sharper than ever. What if the law took the dogs away? What if Crawford found some loophole and succeeded? Catherine didn't just worry for herself anymore. She worried for Emma, for the battered shepherds, for the delicate trust that was finally forming in their patchwork family. A few days later, Officer Reynolds returned with a scanner and an official from the Animal Control Office. Catherine held her breath as each dog was scanned. The results were instant and irrefutable. Military registration numbers, all three linked to Robert Wells, not Thomas Crawford. "That settles it," the officer said, relief clear in her voice. "These aren't just pets. They're service animals. There'll be an investigation. For now, the dogs stay." But the reprieve only heightened the stakes. Local rumors exploded, some siding with the Parkers, others with Crawford, whose connections in town ran deep. Social media posts flared up, with neighbors taking sides, dredging up old stories about army brats and city people thinking they run things. James tried to shield Emma from the ugliness, but she overheard more than they realized. One evening, after a particularly nasty comment from a neighbor, Emma burst into tears. Clutching Nova so tightly, the dog whined. That night, Catherine faced her old nightmare again. She woke gasping, heart hammering, convinced she'd heard snarling in the hallway. She almost screamed, until she realized it was Shadow, lying quietly beside her bed, his eyes warm and watchful, not threatening. For the first time, she let him rest his head on her lap, her fingers curling into his fur as she steadied her breath. Shadow didn't move, didn't judge. He simply waited until her panic ebbed. The next day, the Parkers met with a military liaison who explained the seriousness of the dog's registration. "These animals are more than companions," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "They've served, and their bond with your family now is part of their therapy, and yours. But this won't be easy. Legal battles like these can drag on. Stay strong." Emma's quiet resilience shone brighter than ever. She refused to say goodbye to Nova, sitting stubbornly beside the shepherd and reading her storybooks, as if sheer willpower could anchor the dog in their lives. James, seeing the stress nearly overwhelm Catherine, stepped up more than ever, handling groceries, comforting Emma, even fielding reporters' questions with a steely calm. It all felt precarious, every day a balancing act. But beneath the fear and frustration, something fierce was growing, a sense of loyalty, a determination not to be bullied or shamed. The Parkers clung to each other and the dogs, unwilling to give up, even as the world around them grew sharper and more divided. As the week drew to a close, the threat of loss loomed larger than ever. But within their small house, a new kind of courage was quietly taking root. One built on shared hardship, stubborn hope, and the unspoken promise that, whatever happened, they'd face it together. The air inside the house was brittle with tension. The ongoing battle over the dogs cast a long, uncertain shadow. Every knock at the door sent a jolt through the family. Every ring of the phone felt like a threat. Catherine tried to keep things normal, but her hands trembled over the dishes, her smile faltered. Even Emma seemed to carry the stress in her small shoulders, sleeping curled against Nova, as if the dog's steady breath could keep nightmares away. Then, late on a Friday evening, disaster struck. Gunnar, who'd been fighting illness for days, collapsed in the hallway. His legs buckled, and he hit the floor hard, letting out a pained, desperate yelp. The world seemed to freeze. Emma screamed, dropping her storybook and running to Gunnar's side, tears already streaming down her cheeks. Shadow and Nova closed in tight, forming a silent guard as if determined to shield their brother from whatever harm threatened next. Catherine's old panic surged. Her worst memories flashed behind her eyes. Dogs, blood, fear, helplessness. But now, with Emma's sobs filling the hallway and Gunnar's labored breaths growing shallow, something snapped inside her. There was no time for fear. Catherine rushed to the dog's side, pushing past her phobia and falling back on every skill she'd learned in her years as a veterinary nurse. "James, get the first aid kit. Emma, hold Nova back," she commanded, voice sharper and steadier than she'd ever heard it. Emma obeyed without hesitation, holding Nova close as the young dog whined and paced. James brought the kit, face pale, hands shaking, but Catherine barely noticed. She checked Gunnar's pulse, his gums, his breathing, her motions sure and practiced. She realized his abdomen was swollen, and his breaths came shallow and fast. "He's in shock," she muttered. "I have to try. I have to do something." James hovered, helpless, as Catherine cleaned a needle, prepared a dose of medication, and after a deep breath, inserted it into Gunnar's side. The old shepherd whimpered, but soon his breathing eased, his eyes focusing on Catherine with a gratitude so deep it nearly undid her. Emma, silent now, watched every movement, her eyes huge and glistening. When it was over, Catherine slumped against the wall, sweat streaking her forehead, heart racing. "You did it, Mom," Emma whispered. The word caught them both off guard. Emma had never called her that before. Catherine blinked back tears and managed a shaky smile. We did it, sweetheart. Gunner's not out of the woods yet, but he's stable. In the aftermath, a new sense of unity settled over the house. James squeezed Catherine's hand, pride and relief mingling in his eyes. I never knew you could be so calm under pressure, he admitted quietly. Catherine just shrugged, still a little dazed. I didn't know either. She looked at Emma, at the dogs clustered around them, and realized, for the first time, she belonged here, with all their scars and worries. Just as they began to breathe easier, the phone rang. Catherine answered, half dreading more bad news, but the voice on the other end was gentle, weathered, and unmistakably familiar. This is Robert Wells. I'm calling from hospice. Catherine's heart lurched. She barely managed. Robert? We have your dogs. They're safe. Silence hung between them before Robert spoke again, his voice trembling. I heard what's happening. Could you bring them to me? I need to see them. Please. Within hours, the Parkers loaded the 3 shepherds into the pickup and made their way to the hospice on the edge of Franklin. The atmosphere was heavy, an odd mix of relief and dread. Emma sat in the back with Nova, stroking the dog's head, while James drove with white knuckles. Catherine gripped Gunner's leash tight, whispering silent prayers. The hospice was quiet, full of soft voices and the scent of lilies. Robert Wells was waiting in a small room, frail but alert, his eyes lighting up at the sight of his dogs. Shadow Gunner, Nova, he called, voice thick with emotion. The shepherds rushed to him as if drawn by a magnet, crowding around his bed, tails wagging, nuzzling his hands with joyful whines. Tears streamed down Robert's face as he clung to them. You found them. Thank you. The Parkers stood awkwardly at first, but Robert beckoned them closer. You did more for them than I could ever repay. They needed family, and so did you, I think. His gaze fell on Emma, who for the first time stepped forward without prompting. She reached for Robert's hand, holding it tightly. Thank you for letting us help, she whispered, her shyness melting in the warmth of the moment. Catherine knelt beside Robert, the gravity of the journey hitting her all at once. I was so afraid, Robert, but your dogs, they saved us too. Robert smiled. That's what they do. They find the hurting, the lost. I trained them to heal, never just to guard. He handed Catherine a worn envelope. There's money in a trust for their care, and a letter explaining everything. I want you to have them, if you'll promise to love them. As the family said goodbye to Robert that night, a new determination bloomed. In saving Gunner, Catherine had conquered her greatest fear. Emma, inspired by her stepmother's courage, whispered, You're brave like the dogs. James, finally letting go of old guilt, wrapped his arms around them both. On the drive home, the air felt lighter, the storm having broken at last. The family was united, not by blood, but by choice and by survival. They were, for the first time, not just together, but truly whole. Hospice rooms have a strange kind of quiet, a hush that feels both heavy and peaceful, as if everyone there understands that time moves differently inside those walls. The morning after Gunner's crisis, the Parkers arrived at Franklin Veterans Hospice with the 3 shepherds in tow. The air was thick with the scent of disinfectant and fresh lilies. Catherine's heart hammered as she led the dogs down the polished hallway, Emma holding Nova's leash with one hand and her stuffed rabbit with the other, James following close behind. Each step felt momentous, as if they were crossing the threshold into a new chapter of their lives. The hospice nurse, a kind, round-faced woman named Belinda, smiled when she saw the family and their unusual companions. He's been waiting for this all night, she whispered, eyes shining. You have no idea how much this will mean to him. Robert Wells's room was small, sunlit, and filled with photos from another life. A young man in army fatigues, a German shepherd at his side, faded medals pinned to a board on the wall. Robert himself lay propped on pillows, his hands thin and shaking. But his eyes, when they saw Shadow, Gunner, and Nova, lit up brighter than any sunbeam. The dogs recognized him instantly. Shadow's ears pricked up, and his scarred face softened as he limped to Robert's bedside. Nova scrambled onto the blanket at Robert's feet, tail thumping, while Gunner, still weak but determined, nudged his nose under Robert's palm. The old man wept openly, his gnarled hands buried in fur, and the room was silent but for the dog's whines and the soft ticking of a clock. "You made it," Robert managed, voice ragged with gratitude. "I thought I'd never see them again." He pulled Shadow closer, pressing his forehead to the big shepherd's muzzle, and for a long moment, he said nothing at all, just breathed in the comfort and familiarity. When he finally looked up, his gaze found Catherine first, then James, then Emma. "You saved them. You saved me." James cleared his throat, emotion making his voice thick. "They saved us too. We didn't know how much we needed them until they were here." He hesitated, looking at his daughter, then back at Robert. We want to do right by them, and by you." Robert nodded, wiping his eyes. "That's why I called you. I don't have family left. My whole life these dogs have been my family, and they're trained for more than just protection. When my PTSD got bad, they kept me going. But I'm not going to last much longer." He looked at Emma, who shrank back a little until Nova nudged her gently forward. "These three, they were meant to stay together, with people who understand loss, people who know what it's like to need hope." Emma surprised everyone then. She stepped forward, gently taking Robert's hand in both of hers. She didn't speak right away, but her presence alone seemed to comfort the old man. At last, in a small, steady voice, she said, "Thank you for sharing them with us. I was scared before, but now, they make me feel strong." Robert smiled through his tears, squeezing her hand. Catherine, moved beyond words, knelt beside Robert's bed. "I was bitten as a child," she admitted, voice trembling. "I thought I'd never trust dogs again. But yours, they're different. They sense pain. They don't judge." Robert nodded, understanding. "That's their gift. I trained them that way. They found me at my lowest, too. I guess we're all just looking for someone to help us heal." From under his pillow, Robert produced a faded envelope. "I want you to have this. There's a trust fund for their care. A little money, but enough. And a letter explaining everything about their training, their history, their bond. I wrote it for whoever would take them in. I always hoped it would be a family like yours." James accepted the envelope with reverence, the weight of the moment not lost on him. Belinda, the nurse, watched with wet eyes. "You've given him peace," she whispered to Catherine, as the family clustered around the bed, each of them petting a dog, their hands tangled with fur and each other. "That's a rare gift." Before they left, Robert spoke one last time, voice urgent but gentle. "Be careful of Crawford. He never understood what these dogs mean. Don't let him take them from you." Catherine promised, fierce and certain, that they would fight for the dogs as if they were their own. Emma hugged Robert, shyness forgotten, her small arms wrapped around his thin shoulders. "We'll take care of them," she whispered. "And you too in our hearts." Outside the hospice, the Parkers lingered on the sidewalk, the air brisk and filled with birdsong. The shepherds clustered close, eyes bright, tails wagging as if sensing the deep shift that had occurred. James put his arm around Catherine and Emma. "We're not just a family, were their family now too. As they drove home, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Catherine looked at her reflection in the window, the dogs asleep in the back seat, and realized she was no longer afraid. Instead, she felt hopeful, ready to fight for the animals and the people who'd become her own. But she knew, deep down, that Crawford wasn't done with them yet, and whatever storms might come, they would face them together, with courage, loyalty, and the unspoken promise that healing was possible, even for the most wounded souls. Word spread like wildfire after the Parkers' visit to the hospice. Franklin wasn't a town that forgot a story, especially not one as tangled as theirs. For days, whispers swept through the grocery aisles, the schoolyard, the city council meetings. Some neighbors left casseroles and shy notes of support on the Parker porch. Others crossed the street to avoid them, their eyes cold with suspicion or envy. But everyone agreed on one thing. The fight over Shadow, Gunner, and Nova was about to become a spectacle. It was Thomas Crawford who made the next move, determined and unrelenting. On a gray morning, a process server delivered a thick packet to the Parker front door, a lawsuit demanding immediate return of the stolen dogs. The language was harsh, accusing the Parkers of theft, fraud, even animal endangerment. The suit named not just James and Catherine, but shockingly, Emma as well, alleging she'd interfered with property. Catherine's hands shook as she read the legal jargon. James's jaw set with grim determination. "He's not taking them," he said, and this time no one disagreed. The weeks that followed were a blur of court notices, lawyer consultations, and local news vans parked across the street. Emma grew quieter, her old shyness creeping back, and even the dogs seemed to sense the tension. Nova stuck to Emma's side like a shadow. Gunner's cough grew worse from the stress. Catherine's nights were spent pacing, scrolling through legal forums, sometimes staring at the ceiling and praying for a miracle. The courtroom itself was a spectacle, small-town Tennessee, but packed with reporters, military veterans, animal lovers, and curious onlookers. Judge Haywood, a stern woman with sharp glasses and a reputation for fairness, presided. Crawford strutted in with his lawyer, armed with documents and sneers. The Parkers looked outnumbered. James in a suit he hadn't worn since his own father's funeral. Catherine's hands clenched white around a copy of Robert Wells's letter. Emma gripping Nova's leash in the gallery. Testimony began with Crawford, who painted himself as a good neighbor, trying to rescue the dogs from unstable strangers. He produced supposed adoption papers, photographs, even a forged email chain. The prosecution's case was slick and aggressive, playing up Catherine's childhood fear of dogs, the family's financial strain, even Emma's history of grief and silence. For a moment, it looked bleak. Then came the defense. James spoke first, his voice steady and honest, describing the night they found the dogs, the discovery of the note, and the transformation that followed. He spoke of Robert Wells, of the bond between his late father and the animals. When he faltered, Catherine stepped up. Her voice shook at first, but as she described overcoming her phobia, fighting for Gunner's life, and the healing she'd witnessed in her family, her words grew sure. "These dogs don't just need us," she said quietly. "We need them. They're family." The turning point came when the military liaison, Captain Melissa Graves, testified. She presented declassified records, service logs, behavioral reports, and photos showing Shadow, Gunner, and Nova beside Robert and James's late father. She explained the animals' PTSD training, their bond with trauma survivors, and the irreparable harm that separating them would cause. The weight of truth settled over the room like a heavy quilt. But the most powerful moment came when Judge Haywood called Emma to the stand. The room held its breath as Emma, clutching her battered rabbit, took the oath. Nova was allowed to sit beside her, and for the first time Emma looked up and met the judge's eyes. In a small, steady voice, she spoke. "Before the dogs came, I was scared all the time. I didn't talk. I couldn't sleep. Nova helped me. She listens. She makes the nightmares go away. Please let them stay with us." Tears glistened in the eyes of the jury and many in the gallery. Even Judge Haywood had to pause, taking off her glasses to dab her eyes before speaking. "Thank you, Emma. That took real courage." The prosecution tried to shake Catherine, suggesting she was unstable, but Catherine only smiled sadly. "I was broken," she admitted, "but so were they. Together we're learning to be whole." Finally, the judge called for closing arguments. Crawford's lawyer sputtered about paperwork and property rights. The Parkers' attorney spoke simply. "Sometimes the law must recognize what the heart already knows. This is a family." The tension in the courtroom was unbearable as Judge Haywood returned after a short recess, verdict in hand. She delivered it with calm authority. "The court finds that the evidence clearly supports the Parkers' guardianship of Shadow, Gunner, and Nova. Mr. Crawford's claims are dismissed, and evidence of fraudulent intent will be forwarded to the district attorney." Gasps and cheers broke out in the gallery. Crawford stormed out, red-faced, his lawyer trailing behind. Catherine hugged Emma, tears streaming down her face. James shook hands with the lawyer, the weight of months of anxiety finally lifting. The dogs were allowed in the hallway outside, and when they saw Emma, Nova leapt into her arms, knocking her to the floor in a tangle of laughter and fur. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded in, but Catherine simply smiled and said, "We're just grateful. This isn't just about dogs. It's about family, about second chances." James added, "We hope our story helps others. Sometimes the fight is worth it." That evening, the Parkers sat together on their porch, the sunset painting the sky in gold and lavender. Shadow lay at James's feet. Gunner snoozed by Catherine, and Emma leaned against Nova, her laughter ringing out for all the neighbors to hear. They had won more than a court case. They had reclaimed their family. But deep inside, Catherine knew this wasn't just the end of a battle. It was the beginning of something bigger, something that would echo for years to come, in their lives and in the lives of everyone the dogs would touch. When the dust finally settled and the last reporters disappeared from Willow Lane, a gentle peace crept back into the Parker household, though it was a peace richer and more complex than before. What had begun as a desperate act of compassion in a rainy parking lot had changed every life under their roof, and the echoes of their journey rippled outward through the town in ways none of them had expected. Emma was the first to truly blossom. Her once quiet presence became a small but powerful force in the community. With Nova at her side, Emma began attending a local support group for children who had lost parents, her confidence blooming in the sunlight of acceptance and connection. She led Nova into rooms full of frightened faces and broken hearts, letting the shepherd's gentle eyes and warm fur do what words alone never could. Before long, Emma started speaking more in front of others, guiding the other children through simple dog training routines, using the language of patience and kindness she had learned from Catherine and James. Nova would demonstrate, tail wagging, while Emma smiled and offered encouragement. The transformation was subtle at first. Just a few more smiles, a little more laughter. But it was real. And it changed the whole atmosphere in those rooms. At home, James took to spending long evenings on the porch, a mug of coffee in one hand and a stack of old letters in the other. He began reaching out to his father's old army buddies, reconnecting with a legacy he'd never fully understood. Some nights he'd talk to Shadow as if the dog were an old friend, sharing memories, worries, and dreams. The scars left by years of guilt over his own family's struggles started to heal. Not erased, but softened by the warmth of shared stories and the solid, reassuring presence of the shepherds. James finally let himself grieve, and in doing so, discovered that asking for help wasn't weakness, but the beginning of real strength. Catherine, for her part, discovered a calling she'd never expected. Inspired by Robert Wells's final wish and her own journey through fear and healing, she threw herself into building the Robert Wells Veteran Animal Foundation. The farmhouse, once cramped and chaotic, was soon bustling with volunteers, veterans and civilians alike, united by a love of animals and a longing for connection. Catherine organized workshops, therapy sessions, and rescue efforts. She learned to speak at events, her voice gaining conviction with every retelling of their story. She became a beacon for others struggling with trauma, offering both hard-won wisdom and a safe place to start over. The foundation quickly became more than just a project. It was a sanctuary. The land behind the Parker house, once overgrown and forgotten, was cleared and fenced. New dogs arrived, each one with a history as complicated as the shepherds. With Catherine at the helm and James and Emma always close by, the farm turned into a place where broken souls, animal and human alike, could come to mend. The local newspaper ran a feature on the transformation, dubbing the Parkers Franklin's House of Second Chances. Donations poured in. The town, once divided and wary, began to see the family not as outsiders or troublemakers, but as a source of hope. One bright Saturday morning, the foundation hosted its first public event, a therapy dog demonstration and open house. Children and parents gathered in the yard, watching as Emma, now smiling and poised, led Nova through a series of gentle tricks and routines. Catherine comforted a young mother who was mourning her own recent loss, echoing her own journey in the words she offered. "It's okay to be afraid," she said softly, her hand resting on the woman's arm. "You don't have to be healed to start helping others." James, standing by the gate with Shadow and Gunner, looked around and saw more than a crowd. He saw a community that had grown stronger for having weathered a storm. Neighbors who had once whispered behind curtains now approached with food, donations, and, more importantly, friendship. One retired Marine even offered to build a new kennel for all the future heroes you'll help. As the day drew to a close, Emma gathered the other children in a circle beneath the big oak tree, Nova at her feet, ears perked, eyes soft. She told them about her mother, about fear, and about hope. "It's okay to miss someone," Emma said quietly, "but it's also okay to be happy again. Nova taught me that. We can remember the ones we love and still let new friends into our hearts." The Parker family had been transformed, not just by tragedy, but by the choice to open themselves to healing, to trust, and to love. Shadow, Gunner, and Nova were more than survivors or service animals now. They were symbols of the resilience that comes from facing pain together, of the quiet power found in forgiveness and compassion. That night, after the last visitor left and the dogs curled up in their favorite corners, Catherine stood at the window, looking out over the moonlit fields. She thought of Robert Wells, of all the wounds and fears that had brought them to this moment, and of the many lives that had already begun to change for the better. She knew there would still be hard days. Grief was not a wound that ever truly vanished, but she also knew that, with family and friends beside her, she could face whatever came next. Healing, she realized, wasn't a destination, but a journey, one made possible by trust, by courage, and by a little help from those who understood pain the best. And sometimes, as she watched Emma and Nova playing in the fading light, Help came from the most unexpected places. The first crisp breath of autumn swept through Franklin, painting the fields behind the Parker home with amber and gold. Where once the farmhouse stood alone at the end of Willow Lane, now the Wells Foundation Center pulsed with life. Laughter and voices drifted across the land, mingling with the low, contented barks of dogs at play. For the Parkers, each day felt like the start of something bigger than themselves, a chapter they'd never planned, but now couldn't imagine living without. The dogs had found their places, not just in the Parker family, but in the lives of so many others. Shadow, the stoic sentinel, became the anchor for new veterans coming through the center. He'd sit quietly by their side, his calm presence giving permission to grieve, to remember, and, sometimes, for the first time in years, to laugh. Gunnar, now recovering and slower but still dignified, spent his afternoons curled up with the children in therapy sessions, his graying muzzle soaked with tears and sticky with the crumbs of shared snacks. Nova, always the gentle spirit, had become Emma's loyal partner in outreach, visiting local hospitals, schools, and even the county courthouse, where her story brought hope to kids tangled in the foster system. The center itself thrived. A wooden sign out front read, Wells Foundation Center, a place for healing for all, hand-painted by Catherine and Emma on a rainy Saturday. Volunteers bustled in and out, bringing new dogs, delivering supplies, or just stopping by to sit a while and talk. The fields out back bloomed with sunflowers, wild grass, and hope. Each corner a testament to the work done, and the work still to come. One Saturday, the entire community gathered for a memorial in Robert Wells's honor. The sun was warm, a rare break in the long Tennessee fall. James, his suit pressed and his voice steady, spoke first. Robert taught us that family isn't just blood, he said, glancing at Shadow, who lay at his feet like a knight's faithful guardian. He taught us that healing takes time, and that scars, old and new, are nothing to be ashamed of. We're here because of his love for these dogs, and for all of us. Catherine spoke next, her voice stronger than ever. Robert's wish was for this place to become a sanctuary, and every one of you is a part of that dream. If you ever need help or hope, or just a friend to listen, we're here. Emma stood with Nova at her side, clutching her stuffed rabbit, a little worse for wear, but still loved. The crowd was silent as Emma raised her voice, clear and confident. I was afraid for a long time, losing my mom, moving here, not knowing anyone. But these dogs taught me that it's okay to trust again. It's okay to let people in. She looked down at Nova, eyes shining. Thank you for helping me be brave. After the memorial, as neighbors shared stories, the center opened its doors for a special adoption event. Families wandered through the sunlit halls, meeting the dogs and hearing the Parkers' story. One young couple, holding hands, knelt beside a nervous German shepherd and promised to give him a forever home. Catherine watched with tears in her eyes, remembering the first time she let Shadow rest his head in her lap, the first time she'd felt safe enough to stay. That evening, the family gathered on the porch. The sunset blazed orange over the fields, and for a moment, all was still. Catherine, James, and Emma watched as a new family led their adopted dog out into the twilight. It was a moment of completion and of continuation, the cycle of rescue and love turning over, never ending. Inside, the kitchen was filled with handwritten notes, photographs, and thank you cards from families who had found healing at the center. One letter, from a soldier named Ben, read, I didn't think I could come home from the war. Your foundation gave me a place to heal, and Shadow gave me a friend I didn't know I needed. Thank you for believing that broken things can be made whole. As the stars blinked on above Willow Lane, Catherine leaned her head on James's shoulder. Can you believe how far we've come? She murmured. James smiled, eyes soft with gratitude. We've been through hell and back, but I wouldn't trade a minute of it, not for anything. Emma sat between them, Nova's head in her lap, her gaze fixed on the sky. Do you think Mom would be proud of us? She asked quietly. Catherine nodded, her hand covering Emma's. She would be so proud, and so would Robert. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Catherine wandered out to the fields with Shadow at her side. The air was cool, the sky awash in moonlight. She knelt in the grass and whispered a quiet thanks. To Robert, to her mother, to every person and animal who had helped her find her way. She promised to keep the Foundation's doors open, to welcome those who were lost or hurting, and to never stop believing in second chances. In the quiet, she found peace. She knew there would be more storms. Life was never simple, and healing was never a straight line. But the lesson was clear. Love, resilience, and hope could turn even the deepest wounds into something beautiful. The family's journey had become a beacon for others, proof that you don't have to be unbroken to begin again. As the story of the Parkers and their dogs spread beyond Franklin, more people came, seeking help, friendship, and healing. The Foundation grew, the fields thrived, and the cycle of rescue, recovery, and renewal continued. Every new beginning was a tribute to the love that had started it all, a love that refused to give up even in the darkest times. So if you're listening and you're lost, remember, healing takes courage, but you're never alone. Open your heart to the next stranger, the next friend, the next animal in need. You might just save each other. If this story moved you, consider supporting your local animal rescue or therapy program. Like, share, and follow our journey, because compassion changes lives. And sometimes the most extraordinary families begin with a simple act of kindness.